All right. So tonight we're going to be making a little short video to answer a couple of questions that came up in the old Discord. This is a piece I've had sitting around for a while, and I've been looking for a reason to paint. Don't mind the chips on the primer. It's just the nature of a metal model. But the question was, how would you approach doing smooth blends on armor plates without an airbrush? Well, though not as fast, I think gives you just as good a result, if not better. Colors we're going to be working with are in the green spectrum. So I'm going to be using this here's a Scale Series Black Forest Green. I really like it, pretty dark, pretty saturated. And we're going to be playing around with shading it with a blue-green. Here I'm going to be using P3's Coal Black. It's a really good color. It's pretty similar to Dark Sea Blue from Vallejo. So pretty interchangeable there. We're going to highlight with some ivory. Now, to do this, I'm going to be using some glazing at the end, but initially we're going to be doing a lot of wet-on-wet blending. And one thing I want to point out, I always use a pretty good sized brush for this. To wet blend, you need a rather large amount of paint. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take my size 4 brush, and we're just going to mix together a little shadow color, that coal black or dark sea blue, whatever paint you have. It's on the blue-green side of the spectrum. And we're going to kind of follow our little pre-shading here. So I'm going to take it across the back. I'm just going to put that dark blue-green color into the shadows. I'm not really even going to clean out my brush. I'm just going to grab our mid-tone here, that green, our primary. There's quite a bit of paint there. We'll just start putting that down up here, maybe even a little bit further than the highlight. And bring it back, and where they meet, I'm just going to kind of dance the brush back and forth and let them blend together. We'll leave that blue, that coal black or dark sea blue, untouched there in the complete recesses. And we're going to get what starts to be a nice little transition. If we overpower a little bit, we can grab a little more of the coal black. Smooth that out. Goes together pretty quickly. Can even rinse my brush out. Take a little bit of our green with that ivory mixture. You don't need too much. You can start to blend that together. It feels like quite a bit. So just add a little more green to the mixture. And start to blend it out. Just like that. Yeah, I think that's a much nicer color. And here in this recess, we'll get a little more green. Just continue to smooth things. It's not too complicated, pretty forgiving in the scheme of things. Most important thing is to recognize that you need enough paint to be able to work your blends, and as long as you do that, you can work pretty interchangeably back and forth. I'm using a wet palette to kind of pre-mix a little on the paints. Just kind of going back and forth until I get the color that I want. Could even take a little bit of that shadow color, maybe even start to put a little bit under here. Nothing too crazy. I rarely get the exact tone I'm after in my first go, so It's pretty common for me to go back and forth a few times until I get exactly what I'm after. Call this like a little test swatch for the piece itself. And then I find that when I go to do the next corner or what have you, area of the model, it goes together much, much quicker. Just because you get more comfortable with the tones and adjustments. You don't have to use these colors to do something like this. It's more important that you find things that don't have like, I guess the term would be offset pigments, or have like a cool tone with a warm tone of another color. So like our blue-green is pretty cool, or our green itself is on the cool side. And so what that does is allows them to mix together pretty harmoniously. If they have competing pigments on them, they'll, like a warm and a cool, they'll start to desaturate. And that's what we're trying to avoid. We don't want to make a brown or a gray or anything like that. So as long as they're friendly in that respect, you'll be all right. Okay, so that's pretty much it for this. And then the next step would be to punch the highlights or punch the shadows, or take it as far detailed as you would like. I think now that paints have dried just a little bit, we can come through, start our next texture. Just as quick as that. If you take your paint and a little bit of water, you can make a nice glaze. It's still fairly thick. And yeah. Without going too far into any kind of real dark shadow or real bright highlight, we get a nice transition manually. All right. So back at it, things have had a chance to dry, and a pretty nice texture going. And here I've mixed a little bit of black into our blue. I'm just going to kind of glaze this into the recesses. Something we're going to utilize here, it's called a two-brush blend. So we're going to use a clean brush. I'm just going to kind of push that wash further into the recess. It's like a heavy glaze kind of consistency, or a light wash. And we're going to use this in a couple areas right along here. Basically just trying to tighten a shadow along the edge of the armor plate and towards the back. Effectively, we're trying to allow our little highlight to stand, but further enhance our shadows. I like to use this technique a lot as a finishing piece, but it's useful here too in the early stages. We just want to make sure that we get a good saturated shadow up along this plate. Otherwise, you don't really get the full effect of a highlight without a good shadow like this. It just looks like you get a really bright or light color. Back here, just going to do another run of this. You have to wait for it to dry entirely, like dry to the touch, but it needs to be fairly dry before you do your next coat, or you will ruin kind of the effect. You'll get tears. That's still a little bit wet. It's best when you're learning the technique to, just to wait for it to dry quite a bit to be safe. But once you get used to it and understand your paint dilution a little better, you can really learn or be a little more aggressive with it. You'll learn those kind of habits. Okay. And that is how you punch up the shadows pretty darn quickly. All right. So now that the shading has dried, mostly, still a little tacky there in the corner, but we're not going to be working back there too much anyhow. Now for the fun part. So we've done basically midtones and shadows and then pushed the shadows. I add a little bit of white in for the fun of it. So now we're adding more, I said white, but I meant that ivory. Now we're kind of adding a little bit more of the white in to create somewhat more of a highlight. We're going to start adding some textures here. Now we can see that there's a couple little notches on the piece. So along whatever the underside of that is, we're going to really start to accentuate our highlights. We're going to punch these up quite a bit on the edge as well. Because it's a hard surface like metal, our light is going to shoot down it quite a bit. So by using the edge of our brush, being rather delicate, once you find the right angle to get the edge to highlight, you can kind of fly through it. Here, I feel like I got like a little bit heavy. So I'm going to take a wet brush. I'm going to erase it back just a little bit. We'll keep the line fairly sharp by doing that. And that's what we want. We want it to be there, but not there. It's got to be super fine, or we'll lose the effect. I think that time I hit it correctly. Now there is a little bit of a scratch in the armor right here as well. And these are all sculpted in. So I'm just painting them as they're sculpted. There's another one right here. But you could just draw these in as much as you wanted. I always feel like less is more when it comes to something like this. Keep a good point on your brush. That one's a little bit heavy. Try not to hit the microphone. Again, we're just using that clean brush to kind of erase the paint back, make a nice sharp line. That really works quite well in my opinion. Here, way up in the shadow, there's a dimple, like a hammer mark. This guy's definitely been through some stuff. And yeah, I think that looks pretty nice. We're starting to get a nice little edged effect. We're just going to rip this the rest of the way back. This is nowhere near what I'm going to consider a highlight color in the end of things, but by initial stage standards, this will be the beginning of the highlight stage. Here, we got a little excited again. Just clean that up. And so here in the back, this will probably be our full brightest highlight. And then in the front, I'm just using it to mark off where our highlights are going to go as we start to build up to a pretty darn bright white. Yeah. All right. So I'm just going to clean the brush. It's always good to rinse out before you transition to a brighter tone, because the paint will dry in there, and even though you're wetting it again with more paint, you can oftentimes still get a little bit of dry paint on the tip, and it'll mess with the point. So try not to blow the camera out again with my black glove. Here we've added just a bit more of a highlight color. Work that here in the shadows. Again, we got a little bit excited. So we're coming back in with a clean brush. Just kind of erasing a little bit. And something I think we would benefit from here is actually taking some of that dark mixture where we put the black into our shadow color and kind of washed into those recesses up under here and along the back. I'm just going to take this. I'm going to actually draw it in right above our highlight. I don't like where that went, so I'm going to erase it. I think it went a little bit too high. I think I'm going to try to put it right on top of our highlight mark that we made, but just a little bit above, so some of our highlight remains. That was ambitious. It's completely gone. Yeah. So it goes. We'll remake the highlight. Rinse, repeat. Putting our darkest color right beside our brightest colors. So one right here. Kind of working to create that illusion. Just going to erase that highlight a wee bit. I think in that way we start to generate a reasonable look. Like I said, in these highlighted zones, or real frontal facing zones, we're just going to, instead of adding ivory into our green, we're going to take a little bit of that green and put it in our ivory. Just looking at it from that other direction, right? So here on our glove, you can see looking quite a bit brighter. We want to have a lot of control so we're not diluting the paint at all. It's just off the wet palette. Probably afford to be using a smaller brush for this. I'm not even drawing a solid line, I'm just kind of stippling. I don't love it. Probably a little too dramatic of an adjustment for me. So I'm not brave enough for that just yet. Coming back at it quite a bit more minty now, you can see. Let's see if this is more appealing. See, I don't dislike that look. I'm not going to drag this the whole way into the recesses. We're just going to use this closer to where our brighter greens are, on the edges at least, and then along these chip effects. Just following the shape. Just kind of keeping it tight by cleaning up with the other brush. Just like that. One smooth-ish kind of blend with a manual brush. I'm just going to tidy up this one little detail here, just because we're dealing with a shoulder. And this guy's shoulders are kind of the life of the party with him. These models just have such fancy little shoulder pads, like like some models, it's the eyes or the hands that really are the attention getters, or the weapon. You know, he's got big maces for hands, but the shoulders are so high and oddly central to the model. There we go. I think that could look pretty nice. So yeah, there we have it. Obviously can do more, but I guess pretty good and pretty quick.